Please welcome to the stage CEO of MMA Global and co-founder of Possible, Greg Stuart.
This is what happens when the building of buildings, the science of building of buildings, is ignored. In this famous situation from Rio de Janeiro, a building, condo complex called the Palace collapsed because they ignored construction science. The issue was that they had used beach sand in the concrete mix. The problem with that is that beach sand has salt in it and it corrodes steel. Now, architects and engineers all know this because they are educated, re-educated, and certified into materials and construction science. The profession has standards. In fact, 90% of architects have a degree in architecture, obviously because lives are at stake. In fact, I asked ChatGPT the other day, give me a list of professions that have actual educational requirements for the job that the person's asked to do. There were 71 of them. You know where I'm going here, right? Marketing wasn't on the list. In fact, I also did an analysis of my MMA board members, the 150 board members. I looked up their LinkedIn profiles to assess what was their educational background. 25% of them have a degree in marketing. To be fair, I don't either. In fact, the only thing that I'm aware of is a book called Empirical Generalizations of Marketing. And the issue is, when I asked a marketing professor that MMA works with about this, I said, what's the issue? Why is marketing where it is? What is the challenge we have? He said, there is no codified body of knowledge that exists in our industry that we all agree to. I'd ask a question. How many of you have actually read Empirical Generalizations of Market Impact? Yeah, I figured. How many of you even knew it existed? Even better. Oh, okay, I got one hand, maybe two on that. Good. There were 125 empirical generalizations in that book predicated on 12 to 15,000 research studies or papers. Note that we are working to update that. I think a board member best summed it up to us in a board meeting the other day when he said, the discipline of marketing is largely undisciplined. So here's my assertion today, everybody. This is where we're going. I'm going to contend and show to you that we need to emphasize the importance of science, not just data. I'll come back to that. Because doing so is going to help us build knowledge that contributes more effectively to the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish. So for the next 8 minutes, I'm basically going to show you missed opportunities by ignoring science, some proven scientific knowledge that we have that is yielding huge results and what that means, and some very practical first steps around it. So why does science matter to me? Why does Greg Stuart even sort of per se care about this, given I don't have a background, I don't have an educational background in marketing? I had an epic experience about 25 years ago. I was asked to step in as the CEO of the Interactive Advertising Bureau and turn that organization around. The job was, in essence, to save online advertising. My first press release by that organization was to announce that we were so excited that online advertising had only gone down minus 27% versus a year ago. That we viewed as success. Now, the challenge we had, and what I saw for the IB to execute at that time, and this is 2001, was that online media, if any of you can remember this far back, was only 3% of the marketing mix. And that wasn't even so much the problem. The challenge was that the prevailing measurement system at the time was media mix modeling, which doesn't measure small or new media. That was a problem. Now, I ended up meeting a gentleman named Rex Briggs, which is arguably, if you know him, probably marketing's greatest measurement inventor. He was working on a system called Multitouch, that we now call Multitouch attribution, all we call it time. He, me, and the IEB then worked to popularize that measurement science. We conducted 24 studies for $7 million over a 5-year period to validate online role in the marketing mix, that it should be much larger. In fact, what the stats showed was that it easily should be well into double digits, as you would all certainly expect. It was what economic science would have told you, obviously. It was the deal of the century. High supply, middling demand, it will be the deal of the century. Now, what's interesting about it at the time is that Ford was relaunching the F-150. Bill Ford called it the most important car launch in Ford's entire history. There was a lot riding on the success of the relaunch of the F-150. They decided to bring in MTA to understand what a modern marketing mix, if that would be helpful to the business. What we found from that pivotal study in 2004, that via an A/B test split, that consumers who were exposed to 25% of marketing or marketing mixes with 25% internet, sales were 2.5 billion over the group that wasn't exposed to internet. That was what set up internet to be an accelerated way the business is today. Dramatic. This was a revolutionary insight for Ford. In fact, this happened to be 10% increase over the sales they would have. There's not a company in the world who doesn't want to produce an easy 10% increase in sales just by rethinking marketing mix in a more fundamental way. It was an incredible competitive advantage for Ford, and they've adopted it aggressively. Here's the big point that I want to make about this too, that just make sure you're really paying attention. Marketing really does matter. It really does. I'm not so sure all the time that we realize the degree to which it does. Okay. But again, just to state the obvious, what's dramatic about this point is that there was no measurement science at the time that could have done that. Now, prior to this, I had actually worked in the agency business at Y&R, and I had a boss who used to yell at me and my team all the time right after meetings. It was just his way of doing things, whatever. But he used to always demand that we would give the client a quick and immediate answer. I guess he thought somehow that would make the client feel more comfortable. We used to call it an eternity, the be wrong but be strong strategy for marketing. I'm not so sure that was such a good idea. Now, I'm going to share 2 examples from the MMA that we have in advancing science more recently. First one is that we have discovered an autopoietic approach with unsupervised machine learning using specific computer science techniques called one-hot encoding and K-modes clustering. Now, autopoietic is actually from biology. It basically means always evolving, and K-modes clustering is the way you build cohorts in order to serve personalized ads against. What's interesting in that is that those studies have demonstrated in the 20 studies that we've done. Whoops, if we could go back there, Steve. In the 22 studies that we've done, we've seen an average gain of plus 149%. That is the most dramatic impact I have seen from any single technique in the many decades that I've been doing marketing. No, personalization is hard, though. There's much more complex than that. We've also used neuroscience research inherent in a concept called inattentional blindness, which Harvard Simons and Schuster covered in a 1999 selection attention test. But we used that brain science in order to create a new targeting segmentation growth strategy that appears at this time to beat every other targeting segmentation that exists and has existed for decades that you've all built your careers and your business on. We think it's better. Now, it's using also the economic science of marginal utility. It's also got statistical techniques, beta distribution, logit functions, basically what Moneyball was all about, if you're familiar with that. So here's the deal, everybody. There's a lot of science that could be applied. I'm not so sure how much we've really taken the opportunity to do that. And I know we've built ourselves on data. We've done a lot on data. You all consider yourselves, I'm sure, data marketers, right? And there's ample evidence that supports business and marketing, I would say. In fact, a very highly cited paper from professors at Stanford, MIT, and Wharton really proved and validated that those companies who use data-driven decisions outperform those that don't. In fact, 4 to 6% in productivity and profitability. that's dramatic. But my point today is that we need to double down on science. That is our big opportunity. In fact, let me just turn off the slides and talk to you here for a couple moments. Here's the deal. For years, we marketers have navigated an incredibly complex environment. Dramatic change like I've never seen, and as you can tell, for the multi-decades I've been here. And I think we've all felt the incredible pressure to prove the value that we could have for the businesses, yet knowing that we don't have the science that our peers in finance, technology, engineering, I think, take for granted. Today, we saw what happens when foundations that were weak in my first illustration. For marketing, you know that the demand for accountability for measurable, predictable results is only going to increase. I mean, and again, and this is where it's going to get important here, we've adopted data, but I see too often it's data without the underpinnings of understanding science. We as an industry are using data to make decisions, but without applying scientific rigor, hypothesis generation, testing, especially learning. We are accumulating experience, but not knowledge. There's a difference. Let me say it again. We are accumulating experience, but not necessarily knowledge. With knowledge derived from science, imagine that this could be an outcome of this, right? You walk into the board meeting. You're not just presenting a campaign that sort of lightens up the room with excitement and emotion, and no disrespect to that, but you're actually providing scientific precision, leveraging validated models to personalize experiences, optimize every dollar spent, and drive incremental growth with confidence. Imagine what that would mean to us as marketers if that's how we were presenting ourselves. Because here's the issue. Without science, when context changes, and who wants to vote for there's a lot of change going on right now, the data has limited value or frankly can just be wrong. So key to all of this is an experimental mindset that separates cause from correlation and really helps us validate the work that we're doing. Now, let me be clear. Do we have knowledge now? No, not even close. We're going to update empirical generalizations. MMA is continuing to do more experiments. And we're on a mission to support the industry as a nonprofit trade association, which is who the MMA is, just to be clear, to support the industry to find and develop more knowledge. Now, so far, we believe, on what we know now, that the boards of the MMA know and the member marketers know that if you deploy just the science we've developed so far, you could legitimately, potentially, likely move the stock price of a company plus 8 to 12%. Now, nothing is that easy. Science is hard. It takes time. You have to get it right for you, but that is the opportunity. It's not going to be easy, but I'd like to suggest it's possible. Marketing Canada does matter a lot. Have a great show, everybody.